The day I found a dead fish flopping in my toilet was the day I knew the HOA had declared war. Not a warning, not a neighborly chat, just a corpse in porcelain and silence in my pipes. You think I'm kidding? Keep watching, because what started as a dead fish turned into a full-blown water war. And I didn't just survive it, I rewrote the rules. My name's Wade Callahan. I live on 20 acres of ranch land that's been in my family since Elvis was still skinny. I raise cattle, I grow tomatoes, and I mind my own damn business. Or at least I used to, before Karen Templeton and her little kingdom of clipboards decided I was a threat to neighborhood harmony. It started with no water. Not just a leaky pipe or a city glitch. One day I turned on the faucet and got nothing but a dry cough and a smell like metal. Outside, my cattle troughs were bone dry. My tomato vines drooped like they'd been cursed. Even my dogs were eyeing the bird bath like it was the last canteen in the desert. And then I saw it. A single envelope taped to my fence post like a ransom note. Water access suspended pending compliance with HOA green space regulations. No explanation, no hearing, no mercy. That's when I realized this wasn't about shrubs. This was a squeeze. They wanted my land, and they were going to starve it into surrender. But what they didn't know was that I don't surrender, especially not to someone who thinks fountain symmetry matters more than livestock hydration. What follows is the story of how I turned sunlight into water, a shed into a revolution, and a passive-aggressive HOA into a cautionary tale for the entire county. So grab a drink, because the people who cut off my water, they're about to learn what happens when a rancher goes off the grid. I wish I could say this was the first time Karen Templeton had pulled something like this. But no, this woman has a PhD in petty. She didn't just run the HOS, she was the HOA. Karen wasn't elected. She was installed like a chandelier no one liked but was too scared to remove. Her yard? Perfect, too perfect. Symmetrical shrubs, imported koi pond, a marble fountain that looked like it belonged in front of Caesar's palace. And meanwhile she had the gall to fine me last year because my rooster crowed before 8 a.m. Yeah, as if livestock wear watches. But here's the thing about Karen, she didn't enforce rules to protect the community. She enforced them to control it, to own it. And the board? They weren't a board. They were her backup dancers. Mostly retirees with weak spines and strong opinions, nodding along while Karen flipped through color-coded violation photos like she was judging a gardening reality show. Let me tell you about the windmill incident. I'd salvaged an antique windmill from my grandfather's ranch in Amarillo. It was rusted, gorgeous, and stood like a sentinel overlooking my fields. Within 48 hours, Karen sent me a letter claiming it was visually aggressive. Visually aggressive. Like my windmill was going to march into her koi pond and start swinging? If you've ever had a neighbor like this, or worse, a whole board of them, go ahead and hit that like button. And drop a comment below. I want to hear your HOA horror stories. Misery loves company, and I know I'm not alone in this mess. But back to the water. See, this wasn't just another fine. This wasn't about hedge height or rooster etiquette. This was war. Strategic, calculated, surgical. Cutting off a man's water when he raises livestock and grows food? That's not enforcement. That's sabotage. And I knew why. Karen had been pushing for the HOA to build a community recreation annex, a fancy name for a clubhouse/pool combo with a juice bar, yoga deck, and probably a giant mural of her face. Only problem, her plan needed land. And the biggest, flattest, most accessible plot in the whole neighborhood? She wanted me out, and she thought discomfort would be enough to make me fold. But she didn't count on one thing. I am just petty enough to survive on spite and solar panels. Which brings me to Curtis, the man with a beard like a conspiracy theorist and a brain like a NASA engineer. I picked up the phone, called the one man who once built a water system for alpacas in Arizona, and said, "Curtis, it's time to dig. You ever hold a handful of dirt and feel like you're shaking hands with your grandfather?" That's what this land is to me. It ain't just soil and fence posts. It's memory. It's bloodline. It's Sunday dinners and 4th of July bonfires, and the sound of my dad's boots creaking across the porch floor like a heartbeat that never quite stopped echoing. See, folks like Karen treat land like a portfolio. Buy, build, sell, repeat. To them, it's all square footage and resale value. But to me, it's sacred. My grandfather bought this land in 1957 with a busted truck and a borrowed shovel. He worked it sunup to sundown till the skin on his hands peeled. And when he died, my father kept it going, even when droughts came, even when beef prices tanked, even when the taxes piled up so high we had to sell off the north field just to keep the lights on. We didn't hang on because it was easy. We hung on because it was ours. So when Karen shut off my water and thought I'd throw in the towel? Nah. I'd sooner drink dew off cactus leaves than hand over this land to someone who thinks HOA stands for her overreaching authority. You can't buy pride. You can't lease legacy. And you sure as hell can't bully someone off ground that's been holding their family up for 3 generations. That was the moment I knew. If she wanted a quiet surrender, she picked the wrong cowboy. And if you're still with me now, click that subscribe button. This ain't just a story about water. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to erase everything you built with quiet paperwork and fake smiles. And I wasn't standing alone either, because the minute I called Curtis, the game changed. He pulled up that evening in a dust-covered Ford, eyes squinting at the sun like it owed him money, and said, "All right, Wade. Let's make this ranch untouchable." Curtis showed up like a dust storm in human form. Long beard, mirrored sunglasses, and a Ford pickup that looked like it had opinions. He stepped out with a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a grin that said, "Let's make some bureaucrats cry." Now, let me tell you about Curtis. This man once built a rain-harvesting filtration system for a guy living in a missile silo in Utah. He can wire a pump blindfolded and probably program a satellite with a paperclip and a biscuit. So when I told him my HOA had cut off my water, he didn't flinch. He just took a sip of coffee, looked out across my dry fields and said, "Well, hell, Wade, let's pull the sun out of the sky and shove it down their pipes." That night, we sat on bales of hay in my barn, sketching plans on the back of a feed sack. No consultants. No permits. Just grit, grease, and spite. Solar panels for power. Underground storage tanks for water. Private irrigation lines laid out like secret veins beneath the soil. And most importantly, every single piece of it on my land, within my rights, and completely off-grid. We started digging at dusk. 2 headlamps. 1 shovel. And a Bluetooth speaker playing Johnny Cash like it was the national anthem of rebellion. While the HOA was busy sending drone photos and threatening letters, we were out there laying PVC pipe under the flower beds and trenching around Karen's rulebook like it was a bad joke. At one point I even labeled a fake blueprint Birdbath Initiative 2030 and mailed it to her just to keep her confused. This wasn't just plumbing. It was a resistance movement, powered by sunlight, friendship, and a deep, burning need to be left the hell alone. And for every foot of pipe we laid, I felt lighter. Fuya. Like I wasn't just reclaiming water, I was reclaiming dignity. It's funny. You never realize how much freedom's worth until someone tries to sell it back to you with fine print and HOA logos. If you've ever wanted to flip the switch on a system built to control you, hit that like button right now. And hey, if you're new here, consider subscribing. There's plenty more where this came from. By the second night, we had the trench lines carved, the pump wired, and the tanks hidden like buried treasure. Curtis looked at the setup and nodded like a proud dad at a science fair. "She's ready," he said. I smiled, wiped the sweat from my face, and looked toward the HOA clubhouse in the distance. They had no idea. They were still sipping their lemon water and measuring bush height, while we were engineering liberation beneath their noses. And the best part? We weren't done yet, because right when Karen thought she had me cornered, she asked to use my ranch for the spring festival. And I said yes. God, I love poetic timing. You know that feeling when a bully trips on their own shoelaces in front of the whole school? Multiply that by 100 folding chairs, a mayor, and a busted lemonade tap. Now you've got the HOA Spring Festival. Karen had big plans. This was her unity parade, her community rebrand, her chance to slap lipstick on a dictatorship and call it democracy. And she picked my land to host it. Now she didn't ask. She offered a deal. Said if I let them host the festival on my property, they'd revisit my water access. Right, like I'd fallen off the hay wagon yesterday. I smiled, played nice, and told her to send it all in writing. What she didn't know was I'd edited that little agreement with my attorney, adding a clause about full reimbursement for resource use, at commercial rates. And, wouldn't you know it, Karen signed it faster than a teenager agrees to free Wi-Fi. So come festival day, they rolled in like a caravan of suburban royalty. Golf carts polished, sun hats deployed, tables stacked with store-bought pies, trying real hard to look homemade. They strung up lights across my pasture like it was the set of a Hallmark movie. They posed for pictures next to my cows. One lady even tried to pet my bull. I sat on the porch with a cold glass of tea, watching the whole thing like it was a soap opera with a grill going in the background. Then the plumbing started failing. Portable toilets, packed up. Sprinkler system, dry as a sermon on a Tuesday. The HOA garden, withering like Karen's last shred of credibility. She blamed timers, then blamed the app, then blamed humidity. But folks were sweating, kids were crying, and the watermelon table was looking real suspicious. And then the mayor, yes, the actual mayor, asked where the water was. That's when I stood up. Now I wasn't showboating. I was just being helpful, of course. I offered to give a quick tour of my off-grid solar pump system. Purely educational. We walked past the barn to where my panels glistened like they were proud of themselves. I showed off the pump, the storage tanks, the system that had been humming quietly beneath their noses while they were too busy policing Birdbath Heights. The mayor was impressed. The crowd started asking questions. Even a few HOA board members looked genuinely curious. And Karen? She looked like she'd bitten into a lemon that bit back. She tried to interrupt, said something about community standards and protocol, but nobody was listening to her anymore. Because for the first time, they weren't just seeing water. They were seeing independence. They were seeing a system that worked, while theirs was literally full of crap. If you've ever watched someone try to hold power and lose it in real time, drop a comment below. Better yet, hit that subscribe button and ride this train with me all the way to the next twist. Trust me, it only gets better. The best part? Karen tried to reclaim control with one last offer. We'd like to feature your system in next year's HOA newsletter. I just smiled and said, only if you print the commercial invoice with it. But little did Karen know. While she was parading her clipboard around, nature had already turned against her. Literally. And it started with a single vine. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes it grows warm, slow, and green, like a vine slipping through a crack no one bothered to seal. It happened a week after the festival. Curtis and I were out back, checking the main water line from the old HOA hookup. Purely out of curiosity, of course. We'd never used it, not since we went solar. But I had a feeling. And sure enough, just past the east fence, where the HOA's line crossed into my legal easement, we found it. A creeping little vine, the kind that wraps itself around whatever's foolish enough to sit still too long. And it had found the HOA's pipe. Right through a corroded section, barely held together with county-grade tape and wishful thinking, that vine had grown inside the pipe. Nature didn't ask for permission. It didn't need a permit. It just saw a weakness and moved in. Now, I want to be real clear. I didn't cause it. I didn't touch it. I just let it happen. And when Karen came stomping down my driveway 2 days later, makeup running, voice tight like a snapped fence wire, yelling about water pressure irregularities and non-compliant flowback restrictions, I knew the vine had done its job. She demanded I allow an HOA crew on my land to inspect the lines. I sipped my coffee, leaned against my gate, and said, Sorry, Karen, this is private property. You want to inspect something, try your own pipe. Might want to bring gardening gloves. She narrowed her eyes like she was trying to set me on fire with them. It didn't work. And I didn't gloat, not really. Because this wasn't about spite anymore. It was about balance. That vine was just a symbol of everything they'd ignored. Decay. Overreach. Hubris. The idea that you can control every drop, every blade of grass, every neighbor's front porch until something wild breaks through. Sometimes you don't have to push back. You just have to stop getting out of the way. And nature'll do the rest. If you've ever let karma handle your problems and just watched it bloom, smash that like button and tell me in the comments what was your vine. We all have one. Now here's where it got really poetic. The HOA's main valve line had to be shut down for maintenance. Guess who still had water? Guess who had cattle standing in fresh, cool troughs while the HOA clubhouse smelled like a forgotten gym locker? I didn't make a sound. Didn't post a thing. I just planted a sunflower near the fence line, right where the vine had gone to work. A little thank you note to nature, I guess. But vines weren't the only thing crawling under the surface. Because not long after that, a county inspector showed up. Not for me, for Karen. And she found something way more tangled than a pipe. Funny thing about people like Karen, they're real big on control until someone shows up with a clipboard they didn't see. It started with a knock. A calm, steady knock. Not HOA Maple, no angry envelopes or passive-aggressive notices. But this was county. Her name was Lind. She wore steel-toe boots, mirrored aviators, and carried a clipboard that looked like it had been through something. She asked if she could inspect my solar pump setup. Routine follow-up, she said. Karen had filed a formal complaint, claiming I was in violation of building codes and water ethics. Water ethics. Like I was giving my tomatoes an unfair advantage. I said, "Ma'am, you can inspect anything you want. My permit's framed right next to my grandfather's saddle." Lynn walked the land, checked the tanks, flipped switches, took notes. Professional, efficient, didn't even blink when she saw my camouflaged overflow system disguised as an old trough. At the end of it, she nodded. "Well maintained, fully compliant, thanks for cooperating." And then, just as she was about to leave, she paused, looked down toward the HOA clubhouse, squinted. "Is that a PVC line?" I followed her gaze. Sure enough, snaking through the grass from behind the clubhouse to Karen's side gate, was a pale, slightly buried pipe. And I'll be damned if it didn't look like it bypassed the HOA's water meter entirely. Lynn took photos, measured the depth, didn't say much. Just the kind of low whistle that says someone's in trouble and it ain't you. She came back the next morning, this time with a state-level audit team. And friends. It was game on. The investigation turned up everything. Unauthorized irrigation rerouted directly to Karen's koi pond. Funds marked for infrastructure repair mysteriously funneled into a landscaping company that didn't exist. Renovation projects approved without board votes, each with invoices signed in the same loopy handwriting. Karen's. It was like peeling back drywall and finding termites wearing party hats. By the time the report dropped, it was standing room only at the community meeting. Even the mayor came back to read it out loud. I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching Karen's face crumble one line item at a time. When they got to the siphoned water line, someone up front said, "Wait, you mean we paid for her koi pond?" That room went dead quiet. Then hot. Then furious. Karen stood up, red-faced and rambling something about misunderstandings and legacy systems and how she wasn't aware of every pipe on her property. But the receipt said otherwise. So did her signature. In ink. On every line. The board cracked like an overbaked pie crust. The treasurer resigned. 2 other members walked. And the next morning, a petition to remove Karen went around. It passed. By an embarrassing margin. She didn't just lose her title. She lost the right to hold any leadership role in the HOF ever again. from queen bee to band guest, in less than 72 hours. If you've ever watched karma show up in khakis with a clipboard, go ahead and hit that like button. This one's for the folks who never got their moment. Mine just happened to come with a signature and a PVC pipe. With Karen gone and the board in shambles, something strange happened. People started showing up, not to argue, but to ask for help. And for once, I was ready to say yes. You know what's funny? One day, you're the guy with a non-compliant rooster and a windmill deemed visually aggressive. The next, you're the guy folks call when their faucets start coughing dust. With Karen gone and half the board either resigned or too embarrassed to show their faces, something shifted. The gossip stopped sounding like surveillance. The drone flyovers gone, and instead of letters taped to my fence, I got something wild. Knocks, polite, hesitant knocks. Neighbors who hadn't said more than a head nod in 5 years were now showing up with awkward smiles and phrases like, "Hey, I heard you've got that solar system running real smooth. Any chance you could, walk me through it?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say, "Where were y'all when Karen tried to outlaw tomatoes that grew over regulation height?" But because I remembered what it felt like to be alone, holding a bucket in a dry field, wondering who was rooting for you, if anyone, so I said, "Yeah, I'll show you." That's how it started. One neighbor, then 3, then a whole row of houses along the east fence looking to get off the HOA grid. Curtis came back with his truck full of pipe and optimism. We ran lines together, shared tools, swapped cornbread and socket wrenches like currency. What used to be whispered paranoia at the HOA clubhouse turned into porch chats over iced tea. Erlene, the interim president, a retired schoolteacher with a denim skirt and more sense than the last 3 board members combined, came by one morning holding a mason jar of sweet tea and a notebook fatter than a hog at Thanksgiving. She asked me to help lead a community water project, transparent, voluntary, and neighbor-run. No mandates, no HOA overreach, just people helping people. I told her I'd do it, but only under one condition: decisions stay with the residents. She shook my hand like she meant it, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a real handshake. Not one hiding a knife behind the back. If you've ever been on the outside and then found your way back in by standing your ground, drop a comment below. Or, better yet, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. Your value isn't measured by how well you fit their mold, but by how willing you are to hold the line. We started something real, not just a water system, but a shift. A shift from fear to cooperation, from silence to asking for help. And that was only the beginning. Because once the pipes were laid, we didn't stop. We built something bigger, and this time it belonged to everyone. When you spend years under the thumb of someone like Karen, you start to forget what normal feels like. You forget that rules can be made with input, not just imposed with a fine. You forget that leadership isn't about control, it's about trust. But once the dust settled and the audit report became old news, something new started bubbling up, and this time it wasn't resentment. It was momentum. We held our first real town gathering not in the HOA clubhouse, but under the old cottonwood tree near the south pasture, the one Karen once said was an insurance liability. Rows of folding chairs, no podium, just neighbors, and one very long extension cord powering a crock pot full of chili. Erlene stood up first. She didn't give a speech. She gave questions. What if we pooled leftover HOA funds into helping install off-grid water systems for folks who can't afford them? What if the board stopped acting like referees and started acting like neighbors again? And the wildest part, people didn't argue. They nodded. They volunteered. Old Joe from Lot 17 offered to help dig trenches, bad back and all. The Wilson twins, barely 16, offered to help with wiring and install work after school. Curtis set up a sign-up sheet on the tailgate of his truck, and it filled up faster than a Baptist bake sale. Now, don't get me wrong. This wasn't some miracle overnight kumbaya. We still disagreed. We still rolled our eyes. And yes, someone still complained about my rooster, again. But the power was shifting, not from one person to another, but from top down to side by side. People started waving across fences again. Not spying, just waving. And every week another house got its own solar-fed water tank, not because it was required, because it made sense. And somewhere in all that digging, wiring, sharing, and sweating, I realized something. I wasn't the outlier anymore. I was the anchor. Not because I wanted to lead, but because I refused to fold. And in a world full of folks just trying to keep the lights on and the garden green, that matters more than any HOA title ever could. If you've ever helped build something from the ashes of a broken system, hit that like button, or better yet, send this to someone who needs to remember. It's okay to start small, as long as you start honest. We didn't just fix pipes, we fixed trust. And this time, the water flowed both ways, because long after the permits were filed and the tanks were full, what stuck with me most wasn't the water, it was the silence. The kind that comes after the storm, when you finally know you're free. Some victories come with fireworks, crowds, trophies, standing ovations. Mine? It came with a quiet click as I turned the valve on my own water system for the 100th time, and nothing failed. No complaints, no interruptions, just flow. That summer the sun beat down like it had something to prove. We had heat waves that melted dashboard plastics and cracked the soil like old leather. But not here. Not this time. My trough stayed full. My tomatoes stood proud like they knew they'd outlived a queen. And my dogs? They napped under the misters like royalty in exile. And me? I sat on that same porch where it all began, coffee in one hand, Curtis's laughter echoing from across the pasture, and I looked out over land that didn't just survive, it thrived. There's a drawer in my barn, top right. Inside it I keep two things: that original HOA letter, the one taped to my fence like a threat dressed in corporate courtesy, and the receipt, the one that says the aquifer lease belongs to me now, 10 years. Renewable, signed, sealed, and safe from HOA fingers. Every time I open that drawer, I remember what it felt like the moment they tried to choke me out and I learned how to breathe deeper. See, this story? It's not just about water, it's about dignity, about legacy, about the quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't scream or strut, but stays. The kind that feeds others, not just yourself. Because real power isn't control, it's capacity. It's knowing that when they cut off your supply, you build your own source, not out of spite, out of principle. And funny thing is, folks started coming from other neighborhoods asking about setups, looking for freedom in infrastructure. Even the mayor came back, this time without the cameras, just to say, "You started something, Wade." I didn't. We did. And when he offered to name the water project after me, I said no. Name it after the land, I told him. Because she's the one who never gave up. So here's to the land, to the people who protect it, and to the victories that don't need applause, just sunlight, grit, and time. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's fighting their own version of Karen. And if you've ever turned a no into something stronger than yes, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This wasn't revenge. This was resilience. And that's worth more than any HOA vote ever cast. The stars came out early that night, the pump hummed soft under moonlight, and I sat in the stillness, not waiting for trouble, but finally letting peace just be.